Hey guys, nice morning after Mother's Day. I hope everyone had a good Mother's Day with their moms or that special female someone. We'll just wait one more minute and see if we have a couple other stragglers showing up here, and then we'll get started. That's for myself here. Okay, well, we are at 17 after, so we will get started here. We are going to move on. So today at noon, your skeletal system should open up for that quiz. So that will run from noon today to noon on Wednesday. And today we're focusing on the muscular system. So we don't go into the kind of detail that we have in Biology 20 for those of you who took or are taking Bio 20, although you might not have got to that part yet. And we're not talking about naming, so we're not looking at there's 650 muscles in our body. So we talked about naming a couple in our very first unit where we talked about the gastrocnemius and the deltoid and external obliques and all of that fun stuff. So now we're just talking a little bit of an overview of the muscle system. Okay, so let's get started. So we will talk, I'm sorry, I haven't posted this on Classroom yet, but I will post this on Classroom a little bit later today. So, oops, back to Zoom here. And all right, so again, just a reminder, your quiz opens at noon today and will close at noon on Wednesday. And I will share my PowerPoint with you here. There we go. Okay, and let's start here. Oh, whoops. Let's go back. That's not where I wanted to start. Let me try this one more time. Here we are. Share. Okay, still doesn't do what I want to. Do this. There we go. Okay, so we're talking about the muscular system. Okay, so the musculoskeletal system, when we look at that, we're talking about our muscles, we're talking about our skeleton, we're talking about our joints. So we went through a section on the skeleton, which you'll write a quiz on today through Wednesday. And now we're looking at our muscular system. Okay. All right, so again, we have prefixes. So some of these you've seen before. Oh, whoops. Yeah, whoops. We're just going to ignore this third line. I thought I deleted that. So myo is muscles, so myometrium. Go to myself. Sarco is flesh. So sarcoplasm is like we have a sarcomere, which is part of our muscles. So it's kind of like a fleshy. And the plasm is the stuff that's inside, kind of like cytoplasm. Ignore this next one, ignore the trope. I'll take that out of your, that's not what we're talking about. So we'll just ignore that. Oops. So ignore that third line, I'll get rid of that. And then sep means head or attachment sites. So our muscles have different attachment sites. So a bi means two, so the bicep has two attachment sites or two heads to that muscle. Quadra means four, so quadricep means we have four heads to that muscle, okay? And we'll look at that in a little more detail in a bit. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is how muscles are named. So we're not talking about how you guys are going to have to name a bunch of muscles, because you don't. That's not what's in the curriculum for this. But we do need to understand how muscles are named, okay? And now that we have a little bit of a familiarity with our physiology, this stuff should make a little bit more sense. So let's look at the first one. Let's get my spotlight out here. Okay, so located for the position by a bone. Okay, so here's a muscle. It's called the rectus femoris. Okay, um, this is one of the muscle groups or one of the muscle heads that make up our quadriceps. And we see femoris, well, we know our femur, so it's named because it's attaching to the femur. So it kind of goes around our femur, which is that thigh bone of ours, right? Here we have another muscle, and it's called the temporal muscle. And we see that that's right where the temporal bone is. So that's how that one is being named. Here we have the tibialis anterior. We know anterior is front, right? But the tibia is our shin bone, and this is a muscle that's attaching to the tibia, so it's named for being by that bone. Okay. All right, next we have muscles are also named for their anatomic position. So remember we talked earlier in our very first module about lateral, medial, internal, external, right? So we name muscles based on that. So they might have a name based on their position. So here, if we look at the muscles here, and I didn't name all of our anatomic positions because we have lots of them, but here we see some muscles that are attached to our eye that allow for our eye movement. So for us to look up, down, around, etc. So we have superior, right, means above. So that's why it has that name. We see inferior here with these muscles, that means below, right? So that makes sense. Medial, right, going towards the middle. Lateral is like to the side. So we have these names, so our positional names. Over here, and if you've done the respiratory system for Bio 20, if you've taken that course, we have these muscles. These are muscles that allow us to breathe. So there are internal intercostals and external intercostal. Now, remember, costa means ribs. Inter means between. Okay, so these are muscles that are between our ribs. And then we have the internal and external, right? Externals toward the outside, internals towards the inside. So internal and external intercostals. So we see where those are here. So that's that internal external part. Okay, so they can be named that way. And remember, a lot of these names, as we can see right now, are combo names. They have more than one reason why they're named. Okay, the next way that muscles are named can be for the size of the muscle. Okay, so if I look at this image here, now we talked about the gluteus maximus in our very first module. Gluteus maximus, that's big. Gluteus medius is medium sized, and gluteus minimus is small, right? So maximus, medius, and minimus. Here, if we look at this muscle, okay, so this muscle, now we see fibularis or fibularis. So we know it's attached to our fibula. So that's where it's attached to the bone part, right? So it has that part of its name. But longus means long. So it's a long muscle that it's attached to our fibula. Here is fibularis brevis. It's a short muscle that's attached to the fibula. So again, we can name muscles for size. So we've seen examples of maximus, medius, minimus, longus, brevis. There's other ones. There's one called vastus, which is vast, right? So very big. So we have different ones that are named for size. So these are just some examples of that. Muscles can be named for what their shape is. So deltoid, so this is our deltoid. So remember back our very first module, our deltoid is our shoulder muscle, right? So here's our deltoid. Well, delta is a triangle. So those of you who took Science 10, you had your formulas, you had delta V and delta T, right? Change in time, delta D, change in distance. Delta means change in, but delta symbol is a triangle, right? So a deltoid has a triangular shape. Our trapezius, right? So we talked about the trapezius here in the back. Oh, just one second here. We're starting our muscles, Jason. So we're looking at muscles, and I'll post this to Google Classroom a little bit later. So we're doing our muscle system. Okay, so our trapezius, so we see this is like a trapezoid shape, right? And that's why that muscle is called the trapezius. Another thing muscles are named for is, they're named for shape. So circular, orbicularis, orbicularis. So this muscle is called an orbicularis, right? And this muscle goes around here and it's got a circular shape. So muscles can be named for their shape. Okay, another way muscles are named, they can be named for the direction of the muscle fibers. Okay, so here, if the fibers are going straight, okay, so the fibers are going in a straight line, then that's rectus. So we've seen some different examples of rectus already in this, but here is the abdominal rectus, right? And we've named that earlier in the year, but abdominal rectus, they're going in a straight line. Here we see our external obliques, and we can see that they're crossed. Oblique means angled, so these ones are angled. So the direction of the fibers is another way that we can name muscles. We can name muscles with what action they have in our body. So we've talked about different actions when we talked about movement, and you guys had to do a practical on that. So levator, well, levitate, to rise. So these muscles cause things to rise. So if we look at this muscle here, and you don't have to memorize the names of these muscles, you just have to know different ways muscles are named. But this is levator scapulae. Okay, that's what this muscle is. But basically what it's doing is it's moving up our scapula, right? That muscle is responsible for moving up our scapula. So really it's named in two ways. It's named by the action the muscle has to raise, and it's attached to the scapula. So it's named for bone, okay? Extensor means to extend. So this muscle is an extensor, so it's extending. So it's causing extending to happen here in our leg. It's also named for its length. It's a long muscle, so it's longus. And then if we look at this other one here that I put to the side, okay, these are our adductor muscles. So they have an adductor, the word adductor in their name. So adductor means to bring in, right? So when we're squeezing our thighs together, that's this muscle. Okay, so they can be named for that as well. Okay. Muscles can also be named for how many heads the muscle has on it. Okay, so how many heads or attachment points is used by this suffix seps. So we have biceps, triceps, quadriceps. So if we look at our biceps, right, we have two heads, one head here and one head here. So biceps, that's where it gets its name from. Triceps, 1, 2, 3 heads. Okay, so bicep or triceps. And if we look at triceps, right, we have two words here, triceps, 3 heads, brachii, right? So brachii means arm. So arm muscle, 3 heads. Okay. All right. So those are the ways that the muscles are named. So you need to know those. There we go. We need to know those 7 different ways that muscles can be named. So there's 7 ways, and oftentimes they're combined together. So a muscle might not be named just in one way. It might be named in several different ways. Okay. And there might be a second part to a muscle name that we aren't that familiar with, right? So we learned about the pectoris, right? But there's actually the pectoris majoris. Major means big, and pectoris minoris, which means small. So we have often 2 or 3 part muscle names, and often we've combined these 7 different naming methods together to come up with those. Okay, so you don't need to know the names of muscles, but you do need to know the 7 different ways muscles are named. Okay, all right, next we also need to know the different types of muscle cells. Okay, so this is something that you do learn in Bio 20, is you learn the different types of muscle cells. Okay, so we have smooth muscle, we have cardiac muscle, and we have skeletal muscle. Smooth muscle is associated with our internal organs. So that's allowing movement in our internal organs, but not that we have conscious control over. So examples of that we'll talk about is it allows our blood vessels to constrict, right? So they can dilate and constrict. So there's muscle, and we already know that. There's muscle in our blood vessels that allow for that movement. There's a muscle in our digestive tract that moves food along. Often when we have muscles in tubes, those muscles cause a peristaltic or a wave-like movement where they move things down that way. So that's typically what happens in our digestive system. We have muscles in our reproductive system. We have muscles all throughout our internal organs. So for our stomach, right, we have muscles in our stomach to allow it to churn up the food that's in it. We have muscles in our bladder which allow it to contract so the urine can leave our bladder. So all of these examples are smooth muscle. When I take a look at smooth muscle, I can see that there's a single nucleus and they're kind of tapered at the end, okay? Cardiac, we know cardiac means heart, so cardiac muscle is associated with the heart. So when I look at the cells that make it up, the cells are separated by these little white pieces here. They're called intercalculated discs. You don't have to know that. But we can see how there's a single nuclei. But the difference here, when I look at these two, they're not tapered. And see how these guys have lines through these cells, and these guys don't have lines through them, okay? But they do just have a single nuclei, but we can see how these cells are kind of branched together, okay? So that's our cardiac muscle. So remember our heart beats, that's that muscle, that's those cells. And then the one that we think about a lot, so we don't have any conscious control over this one either, but our skeletal muscle, that's the one we have conscious control over. If we take a look at these cells, we can see that our muscle cells actually have more than one nuclei in them. We can see that they're striated, just like our cardiac muscles. So they have these little lines in them, okay? But they're not tapered like smooth muscle, and they're not branched like cardiac muscle. And these are the guys that we have conscious control over. Okay. All right, so if we take just another image here of different types of muscle cells. So our cardiac muscle cells, so here we see the striations. That's from our heart. Our skeletal muscle cell, more than one nuclei in a cell, and we still have striations, but no branches. And then smooth muscle, so this is connected to showing our stomach. It's tapered, no striations, with a single nucleus. So we do have to know the difference between these cells. Okay. All right, and then we can see with this image here, we can see an illustration, and then we can see what it would look like underneath a microscope. So here we're looking at skeletal tissue, more than one nuclei, striations. Over here we see the cardiac muscle. The cardiac muscle has these intercalcated discs that join our cells together, but a single nuclei, but they're branched, but they are striated. And then at the bottom here, we can see what our smooth muscle looks like, where it's tapered at the ends, but they have single nuclei, but no striations, so no stripes in them, okay? All right, so we're just gonna go through each one of these independently here. So our first one we're gonna talk about is the smooth muscle. So smooth muscle, involuntary control. That means we don't have conscious control over it. We wanna remember, this is pretty important that we don't, because if we decide that we're gonna suddenly cause vasoconstriction in our cardiac artery, then that's gonna block the blood flow going to our heart. That could kill us, right? So we can't make those types of decisions on our body. So involuntary control for our smooth muscle. Location. So different places it's found in our bodies. So in our walls of our digestive system, right? So when we swallow food, the food goes through this tube called the esophagus, and the esophagus kind of has this wave-like or peristaltic movement that forces the food down to our stomach. From our stomach, the food goes into our intestines, which kind of have this wave-like movement as well that moves food along. In our respiratory system, it allows for our bronchioles, which are teeny tiny tubings, that allow the air to get through to the little balls, the alveoli, where oxygen exchange can happen, okay, or gas exchange happens, and they can dilate or constrict. So when we're in fight or flight, right, they're going to dilate to allow more air, therefore oxygen through. Our blood vessels, we can have vasoconstriction or vasodilation. That's because of smooth muscle. We can't control that muscle. And another muscle we don't really think about a lot as being our muscle is that colored part of our eye. Our iris is a muscle. So when that muscle constricts, it actually doesn't allow as much light to get into our eye, okay? When that muscle dilates, more light gets into our eye. So that's actually smooth muscle. And again, we don't have control over it. We can't just will our pupil to get bigger or smaller. So therefore that iris to dilate or constrict. So the characteristics of the cell of a smooth muscle, they're long and tapered. Okay, we can see at the ends. So tapered means getting smaller at the ends. So wider in the middle and smaller at the ends. That's what tapered means. They only have one nucleus. And then they kind of run parallel to one another. So these muscles all run side by side by side. So they have this parallel group of muscle cells. The action, long, slow contractions. They relax slowly. And that makes sense, right? We're slowly pushing food down. They don't fatigue, so that means tire. So they don't fatigue easily. Well, that makes sense because if those muscles all of a sudden got too tired, that would mean that we can't move the food along in our esophagus, right? And if that esophagus, then we can't have any more food and we can't digest the food that we have. So it's important that these muscles don't fatigue easily, okay? And most of this muscle movement is peristaltic. Not all of it, but quite a bit of it is peristaltic movement. Okay, the next one is our cardiac muscle, okay? So our cardiac muscle, again, involuntary control. We can't will our cardiac muscle to contract faster or slower or to stop contracting. Again, we could kill ourselves that way, right? So we don't have conscious control. Where are they located? So these are in the walls of the heart, so particularly in the muscle, right, which is the myometrium. The characteristics, so tubular, they're kind of like a columns, okay, and they're striated, so they have stripes. So striations means striped. Only one nucleus, but they're connected by these, the cells are connected by these discs. So we look at it, it kind of looks like an entire like big cell, but these are actually, all these dark lines are the discs that are connecting the different cells together. Cells are branched, okay? So this branched function to them. The action, they're fast contractions and they don't fatigue, right? And that's important to us, they don't fatigue, because if they got tired, our heart would stop and then we would die. So these muscle cells can't fatigue. Then we have skeletal muscle. So this is the muscle that we have conscious control over, right? I can decide to move my hand up and down. I can decide to move my tongue and be speaking to you guys, okay? I can decide to go for a walk. All of those things I am having voluntary control over. So these guys are found attached to bones by tendons. So that's where these muscles are found. Characteristics of these cells, again, they have this tubular, so a cylindrical type shape. They're striated, so they're striped. But they have more than one nuclei. Okay, so we want to know these different characteristics between cardiac muscle, between smooth muscle and skeletal muscle. So contracts and relaxes rapidly, right? We need to move quickly. If a ball comes to my head, I want to be able to either catch the ball or protect myself, so these have to go quick. But they do fatigue, so they get tired. So our muscles will fatigue, our skeletal muscles. All right. Okay, so we have a little video we're going to watch, so I'll share that with you. So move this up. And I think this is where I'm going here. Oh, oops, I've just got to go back to my share. Try that again.
Muscle tissue is made up of special muscle cells that have the ability to contract when stimulated, so they can generate a force producing movement. There are 3 types of muscle tissue in the body: skeletal muscle tissue, cardiac muscle tissue, and smooth muscle tissue. Skeletal muscle tissue is comprised of long cylindrical cells called skeletal muscle fibers that are parallel to one another and are unbranched. These fibers are multinucleated, meaning that they have many nuclei and have alternating light and dark bands called striations. Skeletal muscle is attached to bones and provide for voluntary skeletal movement of the body. Cardiac muscle also has striations, but they are short and often are branching. Cardiac muscle cells contain 1 or 2 nuclei and are connected by intercalated discs which strengthen the connection between cells and allow them to contract as a unit. Cardiac muscle is involuntary, are located in the walls of the heart, and function to pump blood through the heart. Smooth muscle tissue does not have striations like the other muscle tissues do, and their cells are short and tapered at the ends. They are under involuntary control, are located in the walls of many hollow organs, such as the stomach, intestines, and blood vessels. They function to move and propel materials through these organs. And that be the basics on the types of muscle tissue.
All right, there we go with that. So let's go back to the PowerPoint here. Okay, so far what we've talked about is 7 different ways that muscles can be named. We've talked about the 3 different types of muscle cells, and we want to remember, how are they controlled? Is it voluntary or involuntary? Where in the body are they located? What are the characteristics of the cell? And what kind of action do they take in the body? Okay, so we want to make sure that we're remembering those things. And now we're going to move on. We're going to talk about what our muscles do for us, so what the function of our muscles are. So one of the fundamental functions of our muscles, our skeletal muscles, are attached to our bone, and when they contract, they allow us to move, right? So if I think about my bicep, well, my bicep actually attaches here and attaches down here. So when it contracts, it allows my forearm to move up towards my humerus, okay? So my radius and ulna in my forearm move up towards my humerus, okay? I have this ability of movement. So skeletal muscle attached to bone by tendon, so when they contract, my bones can move, okay? Muscles also help us to maintain our posture, okay? So we have muscles that actually help that in different parts of our body to keep our body in position so we don't just slump, right? So we see this guy's got really bad posture here on the right-hand side, so he's kind of just slumping over. But we have muscles that support our body, so we have this posture. And we can work on those muscles. So usually when we talk about doing work on those muscles, those are a core group of muscles, okay? So muscles include muscles in our thighs, right? They help support our posture. Muscles in our back, in our neck is supporting this big giant head, right? Our shoulders are attaching to those neck muscles, so that offers that support. And our abdomen, right? Muscles in our abdomen, and they actually help to support our back. So if you've suffered back injury, one of the treatments is to strengthen your abdominal muscles because they can help support the injured back, okay? So posture is important. Muscles are also important to us because they produce heat. So every time a muscle contracts, they give off heat, okay? And they actually produce most of the heat in our body. So we can see here, whatever's red in this picture, that's heat, right? So the more contraction we have, the more heat that we produce. So when you exercise, your muscles are contracting more, we get warmer, okay? Now, our body has a mechanism, so when we get too cold, our body shivers. And what a shivering is little contractions of muscle. That's why we're shaking, right? So we shiver when those muscles contract, and that generates heat. So if we're too cold, this reaction will happen to maintain homeostasis. All right, so we're going to watch a little video about how our muscular system works, and it talks about a few of the concepts that we've just talked about. So I'll just open that up. Just make this smaller. This
Each time you take a step, 200 muscles work in unison to lift your foot, propel it forward, and set it down. It's just one of the many thousands of tasks performed by the muscular system. This network of over 650 muscles covers the body and is the reason we can blink, smile, run, jump, and stand upright. It's even responsible for the heart's dependable thump. First, what exactly is the muscular system? It's made up of three main muscle types: skeletal muscle, which attaches via tendons to our bones; cardiac muscle, which is only found in the heart; and smooth muscle, which lines the blood vessels and certain organs like the intestine and uterus. All three types are made up of muscle cells, also known as fibers, bundled tightly together. These bundles receive signals from the nervous system that contract the fibers, which in turn generates force and motion. This produces almost all the movements we make. Some of the only parts of the body whose motions aren't governed by the muscular system are sperm cells, the hair-like cilia in our airways, and certain white blood cells. Muscle contraction can be split into three main types. The first two, shortening muscle fibers and lengthening them, generate opposing forces. So the biceps will shorten while the triceps will lengthen or relax, pulling up the arm and making it bend at the elbow. This allows us to, say, pick up a book, or if the muscle relationship is reversed, put it down. This complementary partnership exists throughout the muscular system. The third type of contraction creates a stabilizing force. In these cases, the muscle fibers don't change in length, but instead keep the muscles rigid. This allows us to grip a mug of coffee or lean against a wall. It also maintains our posture by holding us upright. Skeletal muscles form the bulk of the muscular system, make up about 30 to 40% of the body's weight, and generate most of its motion. Some muscles are familiar to us, like the pectorals and the biceps. Others may be less so, like the buccinator, a muscle that attaches your cheek to your teeth, or the body's tiniest skeletal muscle, a 1 millimeter long tissue fragment called the stapedius that's nestled deep inside the ear. Wherever they occur, skeletal muscles are connected to the somatic nervous system, which gives us almost complete control over their movements. This muscle group also contains two types of muscle fibers to refine our motions even further: slow twitch and fast twitch. Fast twitch fibers react instantly when triggered, but quickly use up their energy and tire out. Slow twitch fibers, on the other hand, are endurance cells. They react and use energy slowly so they can work for longer periods. A sprinter will accumulate more fast twitch muscles in her legs through continuous practice, enabling her to quickly, if briefly, pick up the pace. Whereas back muscles contain more slow twitch muscles to maintain your posture all day. Unlike the skeletal muscles, the body's cardiac and smooth muscles are managed by the autonomic nervous system, beyond our direct control. That makes your heart thump roughly 3 billion times over the course of your life, which supplies the body with blood and oxygen. Autonomic control also contracts and relaxes smooth muscle in a rhythmic cycle. That pumps blood through the smooth internal walls of blood vessels, enables the intestine to constrict and push food through the digestive system, and allows the uterus to contract when a person is giving birth. As muscles work, they also use energy and produce an important byproduct: heat. In fact, muscle provides about 85% of your warmth, which the heart and blood vessels then spread evenly across the body via the blood. Without that, we couldn't maintain the temperature necessary for our survival. The muscular system may be largely invisible to us, but it leaves its mark on almost everything we do, whether it's the blink of an eye or a race to the finish line. This video is made possible by our community on Patreon, and if you're curious about the human body, check out this playlist.
All right. Stop that. And do that. Okay. Okay, we will continue on here. I think I have okay. Attachments. Okay, so skeletal muscle and how they're attached. So skeletal muscle has two attachment points in our body. They have the origin. The origin is the fixed muscle, the muscle that's not doing the move. So it's we think about our muscles as controlling our bones as levers, right? Our origin, so if I think about my bicep, the origin is attached to the part of the bone that's fixed or isn't going to be really doing much moving. And the insertion part of the muscle is attached to the part of the bone that is going to be doing the moving, or the bone that will be doing the moving. Okay. So if I take a look, so muscle contraction moves this part of the skeleton. So it moves where the insertion point is, that moves. Okay. So when muscle contracts, it causes the insertion point to move closer to the origin, and then the body part moves. So if I take a look at this example here that I have, this is the example with the bicep. So here's our bicep. So the origin of the bicep is up here at the top part where our shoulder is, okay? But the insertion point is down here, right? So it's in our forearm. So when the bicep contracts, it actually causes, so if we think about that, right? When our bicep contracts, because the insertion point is here, the bicep is contracting, it's pulling that part of our skeleton to the origin. Okay, so the insertion point goes to the origin, moving my forearm up towards my humerus. Okay, so I just have a little short video here that we're going to watch, and this is on the deltoid. Okay, so let's just go to that. That's our last little video for today. Oops. Now this one doesn't have any sound to it, so we'll just sort of talk over it here. So we see where the insertion point is. Okay, so there's our deltoid, or sorry, the origin rather. So the origin is up at the very top here. So that's what he's putting, this little guy here is talking about where the origin is of all the muscles that make up our deltoid. Okay. And then there's our, so that's our origin. So this is our insertion. Okay, so we see the insertion here is with our humerus. So now what can we do? When we contract it, we can cause that movement. We can see how our little skeleton in this video is moving, right? We can move our shoulder. Allows for all of this movement around our shoulder joint because that insertion point is here, so we can move that up and down, etc. Okay, so we can see all the different movements that are allowed with our shoulder because of where the origin is and where the insertion point is. So even this rotation that they're showing in that video. Okay. Stop. Okay. All right. Now, lastly, because we have a couple minutes left here, we're just going to talk about tissues that are associated with our muscles, so additional tissues and organs. And the first one we're going to look at is something called fascia. So if I take a look at this top right image here, the fascia is what's covering our muscle, right? So we see this white stuff, that's fascia. So that's enveloping the muscle, okay, is the fascia. If I look down here, I can see the fascia on this person, so around his head. We see this white stuff here, so that's that thick white stuff. If you're cooking a roast or something, you can see that layer of fascia on the meat. So it covers the surface of a muscle. Here we see the latissimus dorsi that we talked about in our first unit, or first section. But here's all that fascia that's in our back, right? So that's really thick connective tissue. And often what it does is it gives a surface for muscles to kind of slide. So it kind of covers one muscle group and allows muscles to contract beside one another, okay? So that's what fascia is. So that's associated with our muscle. With tendons, tendons are what connect our muscle to our bone. So they're cord-like extensions of our muscle. It kind of extends from the fascia that's on top of the muscle. So here we see our muscle, and there's the tendon attaching that muscle to the bone. So I thought I would just show some images of some tendons that we're more familiar with. So here's the Achilles tendon. So it's actually attached to a couple of muscle groups, this tendon. It's attached to our gastrocnemius, which is our calf muscle. And then there's a soleus, which is another muscle that it's attached to. And it connects to this bone, the calcaneus, which is our heel bone. Okay, so that's the Achilles tendon, which we've heard about how that can tear, right? Rotator cuff tendons. So these are the tendons that are touching the muscles in our shoulder to the bone of our shoulder, right? So we can have people that have rotator cuff injuries. And then here's the patellar tendon that's connecting our muscle up here, our quadricep. So there's our tendon connecting that to the tibia, which is our lower shin bone, okay? And when we do the little hammer reflex with our leg, we actually tap this part of the body, the patellar tendon. Okay, so those are our tendons. Cartilage, strong, flexible material. It's like a shock absorber. Reduces friction. So we have cartilage at the end of our long bones, so that's not bone against bone when we have movement in our joint. Okay. So for us, our purposes with the musculoskeletal system, it's the ends of our long bone, but in our ear, that whole part of our ear, the tip of our nose, our larynx, which is our voice box, our trachea has sort of partial rings lining it that form our windpipe. Okay, so if we look at this image here, we can see where our different cartilage is. So we can see the cartilage here on the ends of our ribs. We can see cartilage between our long bones, a different type of cartilage here that's joining the two halves of the pubis together. We have cartilage here, and then we can see up here we've got cartilage in our ears and in our nose. So we don't have to know the different types of cartilage, and we can see the cartilage here, so there's partial rings that make up our trachea. And then the last tissue is our skin, okay, because skin lays over the muscle. So we have skin, usually fascia, and then muscle. And what does skin do for us? It protects against infection. It protects against dehydration. It helps regulate our body temperature, so it allows us to sweat, and then that allows evaporation so we can cool down. And it collects sensory information. Okay, so that's it. That's our muscle system. At some point a little later today, I will have a worksheet for you. I haven't had time to develop one just yet on the muscle system. On Wednesday, we'll tackle the joints. Okay, so you guys have yourself a wonderful day. Don't forget the quiz opens today at noon, and we will talk to you guys on Wednesday.